Hello and welcome to the Integrated Rehab and Performance Golf Podcast. My name is Dr. Nick Curtis, sports medicine chiropractor, and I'm running the show here at the Integrated Rehab and Performance Center. Today we're going to be talking about the overhead deep squat test and its significance in testing golfers for mobility and stability. So today, with the overhead deep squat test, we will run down the procedure for the test, and then we'll talk a little bit about what TPI, or the Titleist Performance Institute, has found in terms of correlation between different parts of that test, wherever the failures occur, and what that might mean in terms of the swing characteristics of that golfer. And they have looked at PGA players as well as amateur golfers as well. So with the overhead deep squat test, here I am coaching it. What we have the golfers do is we place a golf club, or you can use a dowel of any sort, above their head. The starting position is the elbows at 90 degrees. Wherever that is, that's where the hand placement on the object will be, and then they just go straight up overhead with it. After that, we have them squat straight down. We like them to start with their feet pointing forward, about shoulder width apart. Now, as they're squatting, we'd like to see how far they can get. We're looking for the femurs to get to parallel. We want to make sure that the knees don't cave in and they don't move out. We want to make sure that the feet don't slide in or out, and we definitely want to make sure that the heels don't come off the ground as well. Beyond that, from a side view, we want to make sure that the dowel is staying just about above the center of the foot, right? So it starts directly overhead and it stays kind of in line with the center of the feet, the center of gravity here. We can see with this golfer here that that's definitely not happening. He has to hinge far forward and then shoot the butt back out to kind of counterbalance. And again, earlier, going forward here, we didn't quite reach parallel, and we had some issues with the the feet not staying straight in line, kind of flaring out towards the side as we progressed. So the directions for this test is we start with that right there. If there's one failure, then what we'll do is we'll move on to the hands behind head version, right? So what this does is it takes out the requirement to hold that object overhead. What that does is it takes the shoulders and the thoracic spine mobility out of it. So now we're going to test, is this a thoracic spine or shoulder mobility issue, or are they at least involved, right? Because it could still be other things like ankles or core stability. So here we're doing the hands behind the head version, and we can see the feet are still a little bit flared, especially that right one compared to the left. And then from the side view, we're still getting the head coming way out forward in front. And again, the head has to go forward to allow the counterbalance for the glutes that have to come so far backwards. And again, that's because there's a mobility restriction somewhere, right? So this did not clean up when we took the shoulder and thoracic spine out of it. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that he doesn't have T-spine or shoulder mobility issues, but we know that they weren't at least not alone in causing the failure of this test. Right, and so what we'll move on to here is we want to test ankle dorsiflexion. It's a big component of this movement and really important in golfers. So what we do here is we're about fist width away from our toes. We'll use our golf club here, and what we just want to see is we want to see if we can get this knee to touch that club without this heel coming off the ground, right? So this is purely testing the ability of the ankle here to do that motion. We call it dorsiflexion. Heel has to stay on the ground, and you can't quite reach it, right? So this is telling us that there is an ankle mobility issue. Again, with this golfer here, we're seeing that the club came flying out overhead. Let's take a closer look at that. So when he went to squat down, again, he had to pull his upper body forward, and again, his arms couldn't even stay straight through here. So likely a thoracic spine and shoulder mobility issue. But when we retest, it does get a little bit better, but there is still a little bit too much hinging going on. It seems like this butt has to go back, helping to compensate for another restriction somewhere, and we would probably test ankles after that and see what those looked like. Now, when it comes to some of the significance of this, again, it tells us a lot about the body, but we also want to know why are these components of the body that might be lacking mobility or stability, why are they so important in the golf swing? And what TPI has noticed in the Titleist Performance Institute in their research is that some of these findings have a pretty good correlation with certain swing characteristics, one of those being the early extension swing characteristic. And that's kind of what I'm demonstrating here. As I come back, we have our right glute taking up this space. Now what we want is when we rotate through on the downswing that our left glute takes that space between the red line without us seeing any motion or daylight in between, right? So we shouldn't be shooting our hips forward and extending out of our golf posture. But what we find a lot with the overhead deep squat is, and here's that example of the early extension, is that golfers who struggle with the overhead deep squat and it clears up a little bit when they do the arms behind their neck version of it. So telling us, listen, we kept the ankles the same, hip mobility, core stability requirements were exactly the same. The only thing we changed was the overhead positioning. When that cleared up, when we didn't have to do that anymore, it will demonstrate a pretty good correlation with early extension or loss of golf posture, right? So that also includes flat shoulder plane, where we start with our shoulders kind of pointing towards the ground, but when we come up into that backswing, we can't maintain that position. We can't get our hands where we want. And a lot of times what we have to do is extend through the hips and the back to get us into the correct hand or club positioning. But again, at the sacrifice of other positioning, golf posture positioning, that's really important at the top of the backswing, right? And then besides that, issues with ankle dorsiflexion, hip mobility, core stability, all of that just associated with different versions of loss of posture as well. And lots of those leading to early extension. Now, finishing up with some of that data, the TPI had collected, it got about 19,000 responses from different amateur level golfers, people who aren't considered professional golfers. And what they found is that about 29% of people will pass the full overhead deep squat test without any issues. 26% will pass once you take the overhead requirements away, and 45% of that will still fail, right? And then so when it comes to the calf flexibility, 66% demonstrated that they were able to have good calf flexibility or that dorsiflexion test like we had shown. And 14% showed, 76% showed that there was no issues with weight distribution from side to side on that back squat. Okay, really important. It kind of demonstrates some side-to-side mobility differences when we do see differences in that weight shift. Now, when it comes to the PGA professionals, we actually get very similar response to the non-professionals, where we get 30% were able to pass the overhead deep squat test. But now, when we went arms down and took that requirement away, instead of 26% of that number now being able to pass, we only had 1.5%, and now a smaller sample size here, but still only 1.5% were now able to pass the test, and most still were limited in that test. Again, that's showing us that it's likely that these professionals were not suffering from thoracic spine or shoulder mobility issues. Now it still could be included, but most of it probably coming from ankles, hip mobility, and pelvic and core stability, right? Because that's the only thing that's left. Again, just demonstrating the importance of that thoracic spine mobility. You don't find a lot of pro golfers with issues in that category. And again, just one of the many things that were tested for in the overhead deep squat test. So that is the big picture on the overhead deep squat test. It tells us a lot about many different components of that golfer in terms of mobility and stability, right? So if you have any questions on any different components of this test, you can shoot me an email, contact@integratedrpc.com. Be happy to help out there. Try the test at home if you'd like, do some recording, see how it looks. If you have any questions on some correctives for any of the different findings, again, you just let me know, and maybe we'll do a Q&A on this as well, and different ways that we can help some of these mobility or stability issues that we have found in this test. So thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week.